We're gonna start off soon. We last left off going over some of the three phases of basically breaking down your ability to get off of the transformation spectrum and now get into the organic development spectrum. And the transformation spectrum is more of, your ability to be from one, controlled way to another controlled way because everything on that spectrum is basically measured and understood by the controller, whoever's programming you, and now you break out of that and now become more of an organic, developed type of person. And then there's level of a phoenix rising aspect that comes about, and it's more of a something that's trying to emerge as a renaissance. And we just talking about how this has happened in the past in the 20th century, and with that happening in the past in the 20th century, we can also see how even now we are tapping into some levels of embracing that for the 21st century. So we're going to continue reading along. Last we stepped off was talking, acknowledging some of the, struggles of what the native Africans in South Africa specifically were going through in terms of building their myriad of different ways of going about their Renaissance, which was the language. Basically, like some of the people that was influenced by those in the Harlem Renaissance, who was bringing some level of, liberated thinking in terms of their approach to expressing basically the ills that they was going through. They kind of put it in the format of music, and they were influenced by those that was the likes of the W.B. Du Bois and the Booker T. Washingtons. And in America, there was like a divide, not a one by one divide, but like a multitude of different ways that people was approaching basically fighting against the struggle and trying to have some level of upliftment after there was a level of liberation after the process, after the transatlantic slave trade. So in the midst of that, these different approaches kind of emerged to where people kind of saw that one way may be the best way for the black people to kind of get their act together, and then other people saw the other way. But then as people was influenced, this was happening on a worldwide scale. And then in terms of South Africa specifically trying to copy what was happening in America, they also had some level of emergence of different ways of basically going about how they can make it, I guess, relatable to their own context. And some people, saw that if they were to adopt the Renaissance and try to put it in the English language, and now the expression is now being in this vernacular of either the British language or the Afrikaans language, and then it's like, you know, it's preventing them from really embracing it as a whole because they have some people that have some sensitivity towards continuing the repressive interactions forced upon by South Africans, forced upon South Africans through the British and Afrikaans vernaculars. So they wanted to like justify the importance of sustaining a more rooted composition of intelligence, seated by the 19th century heroic praises of Mshangweni and Magawani, which is some praise poets that was earlier in the, I think, the 1900s that were, contributing towards different types of writings that were, one of the foundating members of language based, native language basic, like, Xhosa or Zulu language or Venda language that was trying to give some level of intelligence to awake the masses. People that are the intellectual front leaders were Mashangwini and Magawani, are South African poets that was kind of understanding what was going on and trying to use, their ability to put things in a contextualized format to awaken, the masses towards what was going on. So some people were, advocating for more of that type of route versus the route that was more based upon, being advanced in terms of on grading your advancement by your adoption of the English language. So we're just going to continue our reading going forward. You can see this image that I was able to put in. I like this image. This is of the Japanese gardens. It's a Japanese Zen garden that's in South Africa. So this is in the Pinetown area, and I took up the image of it. If you want to see these images and see the full article, you can go to the link that I have in the chat, or you can read along on YouTube. Join us on YouTube, and you'll be able to tap in. That is the link. All right, so we're going to start reading. So here we go. In efforts to solidify a true representation of themselves, both English and Bantu speech were exercised, resulting in intrastate fractals among the creative class. The opportunity to establish their version of a fully defined repository was short-lived, as the enforcement of apartheid suppressed the Sophiatown Renaissance drum writers, as well as the District 6 Renaissance's colored writers through repressive measures such as the Bantu Education Act of 1953 and the Sharpeville Massacre of 1960. So in the midst of, there being some level of upliftment amongst South African writers, like they had the drum writers, the Sophiatown Renaissance's drum writers, and then they had the District 6 Renaissance, which was more of colored writers. It kind of got suppressed, even though it was starting to bring some level of upliftment in terms of the mindset of a lot of the people in South Africa. This is from my studies that I was able to do in terms of African literature, to where I was studying more of one literary poet called Mazizi Kunene. And in the midst of me studying about him, I was able to be exposed to a lot of a school of artists that was actually, starting a renaissance in more of the mid 1900s. And in the midst of that, they still had some level of repressive measures that was kind of condense or, suppress these efforts. And this was, the Bantu Education Act, which is kind of like a education that was only trying to make people understand themselves as a labor force. And it wasn't like trying to propel them into more of an intellectual, condition. And in that, they was being forced to basically learn in the measures of Afrikaans language. And this is something that, caused some level of backlash because some people wanted to basically the students was I don't know if it was the students was rebellion or some people was rebellion about wanting to learn more in their natural language when it comes to maths and English because people were struggling and when they was trying to adopt this Afrikaans language, but it was something that was enforced in terms of the Bantu Education Act. And also the Sharpeville Massacre was something that followed up upon that. And in the midst of these events, it kind of suppressed this renaissance that was taking place, in the 1900s. So this is what, kind of caused more of people to kind of use what they didn't basically stop their creative avenues. They just were kind of moving it. So we're going to talk about more how there was people that had to be exiled in the midst of their, you know, trying to continue this renaissance, but now being in an oppressed environment. So they kind of moved and went into different places. And that's what we're going to follow the path of going forward as we read. So, more academically inclined protesters find themselves in exile, either by force or by choice, in response to the oppressive nature of their homeland. During this era, internal advocacy to pursue a discourse that was not solely based in reaction propelled the likes of Ntongela, Masilela, Mazizi Kunene, and others to preserve remnants of authentic pre-colonial expression through scholarly avenues at universities abroad. So these are the people that I'm kind of talking about. As it kind of happened to where the acts of Renaissance by the Sophiatown drum writers or the District 6 Renaissance colored writers, they were going through the repressive measures that was happening in apartheid, and then more academically inclined protesters found themselves in exile during this time period, either by force or by choice, and it responds to the oppressive nature of their homeland. you know, During this era, internal advocacy to pursue a discourse that was not solely based in reaction propelled the likes of Ntongela, Masilela, and Mazisi Kunene and others to preserve remnants of authentic pre-colonial expression through scholarly avenues at universities abroad. And what this is kind of put into context that some people wanted to preserve the pre-colonial, route of basically like being able to write expressively without being a reactionary to what was going on. Like everything had to be based in what the struggles that you're facing. And that was something that the African Americans was also dealing with in terms of a lot of, what was happening before in terms of the W.B. Du Bois and the Booker T. Washingtons. A lot of their expression was based in towards responding towards, the oppressive measures